Gentlemen, welcome to the General Government Budget Committee. Today we've got kind of a full slate. This will be interesting and informative. Due to some time constraints, I want to first take action on the State Treasurer and the Attorney General budgets, and then go into the hearings for the Secretary of State and the Office of the Governor. Let's get started with the State Treasurer's budget. And I would entertain a motion. Representative Arnberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out the Office of the State Treasurer's budget for fiscal year 2022-2023 as the governor recommended.
Okay. Seconded by Representative Amix.
Mr. Chair, I have discussion. I would like to make an amendment to remove the $13 million in that Star Bonds area. It was, I think, in my opinion, premature, and it's something that can be addressed at omnibus if we eliminate food sales tax.
That was in the 23 budget.
2023 budget.
There we go. Tends to agree with you on that it is premature. If we do indeed, if the tax bill comes through that does indeed eliminate food sales tax, then this is a necessary, if regrettable, spend. But I agree that it is premature at this time. Just further discussion. Yep, Representative Amix.
Mr. Chairman, and also Representative, by leaving it in, can we take it out in omnibus?
I don't know the answer on the process.
I believe it can.
It absolutely can. It's just my personal preference is we follow the legislation. If the legislation's not here, we don't do it. If the legislation passes, then you're absolutely correct. In fact, you're correct either way. Could it be taken out in omnibus? Yes. My preference is to take it out until legislation actually passes, because the question is going to be, is the food sales tax removed down to 0? Is it removed to 3%? Yep, we don't know. And so I'd want to put that together when we know what we're actually dealing with.
I do want to note, though, just the fact that I am glad that it was brought to our attention, because that's something that I would have not even thought about, and that it's even in the treasurer's budget when we're dealing with the Star Bonds on this situation. So I am glad that it was brought forward. I just do believe that it's premature.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just hope that we, before we take any action on that we would know how many Star Bond projects might be in cycle ready to move forward. This could have an impact. Just wanted to state that. The next question I would have, would either one of you be willing to carry the amendment to the floor to put the money in?
Oh, absolutely.
It has to be done.
Yeah. So
and it's going to have to be discussed and done.
Yeah, this isn't exactly gee, we'd like to do this. No, I mean, if the food sales tax is gone, then this needs to happen. Yeah, absolutely. I would take those arrows.
Thank you.
Thick. Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This and Representative, this may be one of those times that whatever that final is, I think it'd be taken care of that way.
Further discussion.
We do need a second.
Representative French was seconded. Now we have discussion. We already did that. All right. Representative Wagner.
I do. I really appreciate Representative Arnberger's addition to the issue, because it's also a question of whether, if the food sales tax is cut, would it be cut July 1st or January 1st? So that would affect, is it a partial fiscal year issue or an entire issue? So
It's a really great point. I hate the fact that our fiscal year and our tax year are two totally different, or sorry, fiscal year and tax year. Yeah.
Calendar year. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does tend to make things a little bit complicated
Right.
sometimes.
And that's when retroactivity becomes an issue.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of the Arnberger note deletion, say aye. Opposed, say no.
oh,
Right, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. That will be included in the report to appropriations. The only other note other than that I had on this entire budget are on the other adjustments on 2023, where there are increases for salaries and wages, as well as the increase in, where was it? Oh, wait, yeah, in 22 and 23. And these were based on anticipated increases in employer contributions and anticipated kids matching grants. I've got no problem with this being included, but it should be noted that those are projections, and particularly with the kids program, that's always been rather volatile. So you never really know what's coming in from year to year. I have no problem with anticipating higher usage than the previous year. I think that's fine, but I think we should just not be surprised when we find out that those numbers aren't necessarily accurate in actual, because those are just anticipations and projections. But like I said, I have zero concerns with including that in the budget. Any further discussion regarding the budget? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of passing out the Office of the State Treasurer years 22 and 23 as amended, say aye. Opposed, say no. Very good. That will be the report to appropriations. Let's turn our attention to the Office of the Attorney General.
Mr. Chair, and make the motion. I make the motion to pass out the Office of the Attorney General's budget for fiscal year 2022 and 2023 as the governor recommended.
Second by Representative Amix. All right, I do have a couple of notes on this one. First off, is there any other discussion rather than me just sitting up here talking? Sorry? Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, while we were doing the Attorney General's budget, I did ask the question about the possible cost of litigation in reference to the redistricting, and I believe we have some numbers that have a representative.
This is highly irregular, Representative.
That's what I said yesterday after the vote.
But yes, if you'd be able to answer that question, that would help us out, I think.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Real quickly, Representative Burrows, in 2011, I believe there were 10 or 11 parties that sued over the maps that didn't get completed. Those parties all requested approximately $650,000 in attorney's fees and expenses. We negotiated that down to approximately $379,000.
Who was the Attorney General at that time?
I believe that was Attorney General Schmidt.
Fortunately, we've solved that problem this year by passing out maps, or at least one of them. We'll find out. All right. All right. A couple of things that I had noted First off was in the 22 budget to reflect the increased collection on the opioid lawsuit, adding the 7.5 million that was determined to be collected after the fact that the budget came out, which raises the all funds to something like 38.7, somewhere in that ballpark. Mr. Wu, are you the one keeping track on this? Okay, very good. The other annotation that I had, when we heard that there were only 2 auditors assigned to the Medicaid fraud control, that caused me some concern. They're looking to add 2 more, and it was put off until 23. I think it would be appropriate to begin the search with the half-year funding for those auditors and get those positions filled. That's kind of an important role. So I would add the 43,319 back in to hire those auditors for the half year, or just less than half a year. Yes, Mr. Wu.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify the 2 at the
Yes, and the FTE positions, correct. Yeah, I skipped that part. Second by Representative Arnberger. Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what all are we adding in?
Well, actually, we probably should break this up into pieces. The 7.5 million that's a pass-through that's collected through the opioid. When we get to 23, there will also be a larger amount added for that. But then adding in 43,000 in SGF for the 2 auditors for the portion of the year that's remaining.
So we're buying. Soon?
That was my understanding from testimony, that they wanted to get started with the hiring process. Hopefully it goes quickly and we use that money, but if it doesn't go quickly, we don't use that money.
Seemed to me it might take longer to get it hired, you know, as
And
tough as the market was on hiring attorneys.
Sure, and it may work that way. That's kind of one reason that I wanted to get started on it. All right. Regarding the 2022 budget, let's divide the question on 22 and 23 because the 2 are different. With regards to the 22 budget, all those in favor of passing out the 22 budget with my additions that you have written down, correct? Okay, very good. Just checking. All right, say aye. Opposed, no. Very good. That will be the committee recommendation for 22. For 23, the only thing that I had, and I'm certainly open for further discussion, but was just adding in the whatever that was, 37 million or what have you, for the opioid collection. It brought the total of all funds to 61.2. I didn't see didn't bring with me what that number was. Stephen, you have that?
should be
34.2. Okay. Adding in the 34.2 all funds in that pass-through opioid collection account. Any other discussion on the 23 budget? Yes, Representative Burrows.
I just wanted to ask that, one, with Representative Burrows, if he was wanting to make a note of what you had presented of the expenses that accrued through the 2011 redistricting. One, do we want to make a note of that so that way? And 2, is that going to be in the 2023 budget technically? Just to make a note that the Appropriations Committee is aware of how much it did cost when it did go through, and that it may be something that may be coming forth in future years or future year.
I think that's valid.
I just didn't know if we wanted to.
I'm not putting that in the notation.
If I may, in reference to the proposal you've just provided, do we know exactly how much money has come into the Attorney General's office from the opioid crisis today? Do we know how much has come in?
Well, I believe we can kind of, I mean, Stephen may, Analyst Wu may very well have the answer to that. We can kind of back into it with the budget here because this is a new development. We can look at what came in 22 and then add to it the amount that was later known to be collected in the second case.
I really think it would be a benefit, Mr. Chairman, if we didn't put that in until maybe omnibus and give it a little more time, that we will know exactly in 2023 how much money we'll have. I mean, we've already got the money that's in there, but it's speculation as to what will be coming in. And we don't know how many other pharmacies are going to settle, as the Attorney General stated. And I think it would behoove us to know exactly what those dollar amounts are to be prudent in how we put them into the budget.
Necessarily disagree with that. The only issue is that we know this money is coming in. We need to budget for this money to then be passed back out. I think probably next year there may very well be more on there that we'll have to do exactly the same thing for. But I think accounting for this money at least would be appropriate. Representative Wagner.
One of our staff people from the Attorney General's office had if we don't mind.
Well, we've broken convention so far, so it would just.
And Eric Montgomery, Chief of Staff for the AG. To your point, you're exactly right, Mr. Chairman. We know these settlements are done at this point. We know these numbers. We know they will be coming in. As far as Purdue, the other ones that are in bankruptcy hearings, that's going to take longer. We don't know these numbers. We know today will be coming in the amounts of the 7.5 in 22 and the 34.2.
Thank you very much. It's extra when he says you're right, Mr. Chairman. There you go. All right. Further discussion. All right, all those in favor of passing out the 23 budget with the 34.2 all funds addition, say aye. Opposed, nay. Very good. That will be the report to appropriations. By the way, oh no, I'll talk to you about it later. Yes, Analyst Wu.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, did you mean to include the notation that
I would appreciate it.
That was my intent. However, we didn't assign a dollar figure to it. I think that number was $375,000. Is that right?
If it's just a notation, then I can.
All right. Yeah. Make sure that number's right. Right. That was my understanding that we were including that notation. All right. Committee. Nice work. Let's get on with an informational briefing, or we'll hear the budget.
Do we need to pass out the budget?
We just did.
We just passed out 2023, I thought.
We'd already done 2022.
We did it separately.
Yeah, I divided the question. Took it upon myself to divide the question. Very good. All right, let's look at the Office of the Secretary of State. And in order to get us up to speed, we have none other than Analyst Dylan Deere. Welcome to committee, Dylan.
Glad to be here. So you should have a budget analysis before you for the Office of the Secretary of State. And I'll go ahead and begin that analysis on page, go ahead and begin on page 6. There's just a couple of adjustments to the FY 2022 analysis and the approved budget for the Office of the Secretary of State. So you can see that the amount approved by the legislature is $6.9 million with 46.0 FTE positions. There's no state general fund in this budget at this time, and there were no adjustments made to that approved amount. The agency's revised estimate totals $6 million, including $1.6 million from federal HAVA funds, which is a decrease of about $917,000 below the 22 approved amount. There was originally requested a transfer of $924,500 from the SGF to the Democracy Fund to meet state match requirements of supplemental federal HAVA CARES Act funds. The Secretary of State was later notified that state match requirements could be met with existing resources. Effectively, what that means is it became an in-kind match rather than a cash match. And so the Office of Secretary of State has indicated that they no longer require those expenditures and have decreased those. Also, for all of the adjustments, there's about $7,801 and other various small adjustments to salaries and wages and contractual services. And there's also a decrease of 4.5 FTE positions below the 22 approved number. My understanding is that those were leftover positions that had not been filled in some period of time. And so they were just saying, go ahead and take those off the books. And the governor concurs with the agency request for 22.
Questions for Analyst Deere regarding 2022? Representative Amix.
Chair, so Dylan, all of that HAVA stuff that we discussed last year, it's all taken care of. Everything's good.
It's all taken care of. Rather than using a cash match, it's an in-kind match.
Okay, great. Thank
you. Moving to 23. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the agency requests $5.6 million, including $1.2 million from federal HAVA funds. This is a decrease of $344,293 below the 22 revised estimate. So there's, for the HAVA program adjustments, you have $1.6 million all from special revenue funds for the HAVA program. This is $353,000 below the 22 revised estimate. And so you have a $300,000 decrease in federal HAVA Title I funds. Then you have one-time expenditures that were in 22 for upgrades and computer replacements, totaling about $50,000. And then you have HAVA state match requirements of $3,085 that occurred in 22 but do not recur in 23. And then you have all of the adjustments. You have an increase of about $8,792 in salaries and wages. That's almost all in group health and insurance and other fringe benefits. And they repeat the 41.5 FTE position request for fiscal year 2023. With that, I would stand for questions on 23. It's in a federal fund. We don't really do federal funds analyses for those, and there's a reason for that. Is that federal funds get drawn down on an as-needed basis, and so they're not projected out in the same way. In fact, they often appear with a negative balance when they begin the fiscal year. And so we do 2000 series special revenue funds, which are based on fees charged. You'll often see one of those, but you don't tend to see federal funds. It doesn't make any sense when you look at a chart.
Come in here and seen a negative starting balance. I'm used to that. Just joking, laughing to myself on lively. All right, questions for Dylan, Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back, Dylan, to the Technology Communication Fee Fund expenditures of 2019 to 2023, I noticed it's on an upward trajectory. And it's up anticipated to be $4 million in 23. Is this a rainy day fund or just one that we're saving to help OITS out?
No, No, Mr. Chairman, it is used to upgrade the sort of electronics and technology systems inside the Office of the Secretary of State. As far as why the balance continues to increase, I'd have to defer to the agency on that one. As you can see, revenues continue to exceed expenditures for this particular fund. When I touch on performance measures here in a moment, briefly, you'll see that there's several ongoing IT projects in the Secretary of State's office.
Follow up if I could, Mr. Chair. I realize $4 million doesn't buy a whole lot of technology, so just wanted to recognize or have the committee recognize the fact that it is going up.
Questions?
I was going to touch over some performance measures real briefly, not to take up too much of the committee's time.
Dallin, congratulate you for chasing Representative Burrows out of the building.
I trust he'll be back.
All right. Yes, let's go to performance measures.
All right, let's start on page 10. So percent of record filing, modernization, and digital record completed, that's going from 20% to 50%. So they're anticipating to be 50% done on that by 23. Percent of online store projects completed going to 65% in 23. Percent of publications available in a digital form. The 21 actuals were about 25%. They're planning to be about 70% on that by 23. And on the next page, the percent of agency IT system upgrades completed, they're looking at 95% with a target of 23 with the current expenditure patterns. Moving to page 12. The percent of business formation documents filed online, that third one. So they're trying to move that forward with some of these IT upgrades with a target of 83%. And the percent of document files, the percent of documents available for online filing going up to 80% by 23, as that being one of the major projects. Moving forward on the elections and legislative matters, percent of campaign finance reports filed electronically going from 40% currently with a 3-year average of 40% with a target of 75% in FY 2023. And there's just one measure I wanted to bring out in HAVAs, and that's the percent of cybersecurity services for Kansas counties completed. 21 is at 50%. Target for 22, the current year, is going to be at 100%. That was one of the major initiatives in the Secretary of State's office, is upgrading the cybersecurity software for the counties. That I would stand for questions on the performance measures. And there are representatives of the agency present to answer questions.
Representative Wagner.
I don't think I have questions on the performance measures per se. Dylan, I have. I do have a couple questions. I'm just trying to make sense of this 406 report. So in fiscal year 2021, everything jumped dramatically as far as repairing and servicing was up to over 2.2 million. Fees, professional services went to 1.9. Is all this related to what?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wagner, if you'll turn to the next page, you'll see that almost all of the increase in 21 is related to the HAVA COVID 2020 funding, Election Security Fund as well. So there was a lot of spending made to secure elections, both remotely and also to make them safer for COVID-19.
If I may ask, of course, then I don't see in fiscal year 2023, that's kind of a one and done. They're not projecting that it's going to go back up again for the 2022 election.
So there's ongoing HAVA spending that's still in the budget, but it's not spending at anywhere close to the same level.
That's it. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. Now, from the Secretary of State's office, we have Jennifer Cook. Welcome to committee, Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Cook, Assistant Secretary of State. We appreciate the great overview that Dylan provided, so I will just touch on a couple of items that we noted in our written testimony. As Diane noted, most of our expenditures for the operations of the agency are remaining steady from 22 to 23. The two areas that we are focused on and we have significant focus on is completing the initiative that we began in 2021 with the counties to help them strengthen their election security. We collaborated with all 105 counties to provide some additional security layers to safeguard election workstations and networks that are used for accessing our voter registration database. So that was delayed a little bit from the pandemic and the trickle-down effect, but we are anticipating concluding that at the end of FY 2022, and then we'll have some ongoing maintenance in 2023 as well. Also, in relation to the committee's question regarding our information and technology fee, one of the other primary focuses of our agency is modernization. And as the secretary has probably mentioned before this committee before, our goal is to move off of the AS400, which is the system that underlies our business services division and is also underlying some of our other agency functions. So that has gotten underway. We are moving very, very aggressively to move off of that system and are hoping to have that completed very, very expeditiously. But some of the funding that you see and the balances that you see in that information and technology fund will be used to support our staff salaries and other things that we need to do to move off of the AS400. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify that technology communication fee fund is being allowed to build up so that you can purchase the necessities to get off the AS400 system. That I could understand that correctly.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that fee fund is collected primarily when we accept a business filing. There's a technology fee fund that's part of that filing expenditure. So we don't necessarily have control over how that grows. It's really dependent upon the filings that come into the agency and how that then is deposited into the fee fund. It grows over time as filings increase.
But the end use of the fund is to get off the AS400 system?
Yes, and to support our other technology needs in the agency.
Right. Okay, very good. Questions for the agency? The debates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment, and thank you for explaining that, and thanks for managing that fund so that there will be funds available to take care of that.
Yeah.
Representative French.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. I just wondered, does Secretary of State pay for the election drop boxes, or is that done by the counties?
So we might need to get back to you on that. That is primarily done by the counties. We did have some HAVA money that came in that was used for that, but I might, Mr. Chairman, if you'd allow me to consult with our staff, we can maybe clarify that. If not, we can provide a written response to the committee.
If you have the answer here, by all means.
Thank you. So I will attempt to clarify that. So we did receive some CARES Act money, and that was used to provide drop boxes for counties. There were some counties that I understand that did not take them or did not need them. So that was how that would have been provided.
Is that reflected in the budget?
I believe all of that money, let me defer again if you don't mind. That would have been in 2021 that those expenditures would have occurred.
And do you expect those to continue to expand that particular effort?
We do not. That would have been one-time funding.
You have an idea how many actually were bought and used?
I don't have that number, Mr. Chairman, off the top of my head, but we could certainly get that number and provide it to the committee.
That would
Thank
be
you.
excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? That's all we've got. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, committee, let's now turn our attention to the Office of the Governor. And by golly, we have none other than Analyst Dylan Deere. Once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So I will now go over the budget for the Office of the Governor, which I will begin on page 5. So the legislature approved a budget for the Office of the Governor in fiscal year 2022 of $37.4 million and all funds with $8.2 million from the state general fund. There was one subsequent adjustment to that. That's the $327,316 from the state general fund. The most of that money is in grant dollars, and those reappropriations happen because as sort of grant recipients sort of go through their requirement processes, sometimes it crosses over a fiscal year. My anticipation is most of that money has actually already been distributed at this point. If we look at the agency estimate, the agency requests a revised estimate of $50.2 million, including $8.5 million SGF in 22. That's an increase of $12.4 million or 32.9% above the 22 approved amount. And that increase is primarily attributable to expenditures from federal COVID-19 relief funds. And so the Office of the Recovery is in this budget, is reflected in this budget, and we have representatives from the Office of the Recovery present here to answer questions as necessary. There's two sort of entries on here, one for CRF and one for Office of Recovery, but frankly, they're both the same thing. They're just from different funding sources. And so you have expenditures of $7 million in CRF monies, that are reflected right there. And for the Office of Recovery, you have expenditures of $3.5 million from the state fiscal recovery funds provided in ARPA. And when you look at the total, okay, you notice that you have $8 million for outside auditors and accountants for the distribution of funding. And turn to the next page, $1.9 million for salaries and wages. And also 25 FTE positions continue to be funded in the Office of the Recovery. Obviously, those two numbers exceed the number that I mentioned previously at 3.5, and so that's just the sum of those first two items as described there. The agency's revised estimate also includes a decrease of $16,571 in coronavirus economic security CARES Act funding that came through the Governor's Grants Office from the Department of Justice. There's an increase of $697,000 in Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, an increase of $1.3 million in federal Voca Grant expenditures in fiscal year 2022. A little bit of detail on two of these grants. There's also, if you go to the back of the program analysis, there's a lot of grants that actually flow through the Governor's Grants Office, and each one has a little bit of description of what those various grants are. Those tend to fluctuate up and down rather dramatically each year because the federal fiscal year does not match the state fiscal year and the governor's grants period. So it has those effects. I think there's also some outstanding issues about a couple of these grants that I believe are going to be some of the other individuals that might testify today I'll speak to you about. All of the adjustments have an increase of $1,319 of SGF due to an increase in operating expenditures for the Office of the Governor. Just some small salaries and wage, mostly adjustments. And the agency's estimate includes 68.8 FTE positions, an increase of 25 FTE positions, and that's largely reflected to the Office of the Recovery. And the Governor concurs with her request for 22.
The Governor concurred with her own request? Shocking. All right, so basically what I'm seeing here, Dylan, is $1,300 increase in SGF, and everything else is federal funds that are flowing through. Is that basically what I'm saying, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Questions regarding 22? Actually, I do have one, and I'm not sure this is actually the Office of the Recovery. How much longer is that office going to be in action? Do we know that yet?
Well, I don't think it's determined, although it is budgeted through 23 in this budget. And I can say that the state and local fiscal recovery funds have a much longer time horizon on them. Although I don't know that it's going to stay at the same size all the way through that entire process. So, but anyway, you can see how it's budgeted for 22 and 23, and then it'll be around as long as the federal funds, in some way, shape, or form, as long as the federal funds are around.
Excellent. Questions from the committee? Right.
Just a point of clarification on the page where it talks about it's an increase of 25 full-time equivalent positions. And of course, I realize that that's related to the recovery office, except in fiscal year 2021, they had 60 positions versus 68. I mean, is it the recovery went from 17 people to 25, or is this a net of 8 full-time equivalent? What's the discrepancy?
So there's a couple of different discrepancies that are going on there, and that's related to the fact that actuals are often actual headcount that are reflected. So it's very difficult to look at actual FTE positions in any particular year. There was a request for an increase in some FTE positions with the Office of the Recovery, but why don't I go ahead and do some additional research on that and give you an exact answer on how that Office of Recovery shifted between 21 and 22?
I mean, just the numbers on page 1 are at odds with the explanation on page 6.
See if I have my FTE. Okay. Yeah, let me get back to you with some exact data on exactly how that's structured and how that shifts back and forth. All right. Moving to FY20. Oh,
One moment, Representative French, slow played this one.
They apply to more than just one fiscal year, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering, I lost my train. I'll come back.
All right, we'll
I will
come
come
back to you. Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darlene, just point of clarification, the actual FY 2021, the actual FTEs, when is that count taken? Just for clarification.
So it is taken at a point at the end of the fiscal year. And so, and that's tends to be when it's sort of reflected. And so that's one of the challenges associated with actual FTE counts. I understand the interest and focus on FTE and the control of government, but probably a better gauge of expenditures is that expenditures for salaries and wages, and looking at whether that's going up or down. Just because there's a lot of challenges around the concept of FTEs. It gets even more complicated when we start talking about temporary positions, and so which are sometimes included, sometimes not included as part of the FTE count.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I that would have been my guess, but nobody goes out and hires 60.6 people. So I figure that's what we actually spend on during that entire calendar or fiscal year.
It's also my understanding with the Office of the Recovery that some of those people weren't even there for all of 21. And so then they become fractional FTEs at that point. It's just, there's a value in understanding how a full-time equivalent person is there, obviously, but it is very challenging when you try to look at it over time, particularly when you try to convert it into actuals and not approved.
As a short person, I'm also often counted as a fractional employee. Representative French, did your question come back to you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It did. I'm looking at the performance measures for the Office of Recovery on page 14. And it says no performance measures were submitted for this program. I'm just wondering, are there no performance measures being developed for this particular office? And that's good enough for a question.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. We didn't have performance measures at the time we prepared this budget. I understand that the Office of the Recovery has federal performance guidelines that is required to comply with, but we just didn't have an opportunity to integrate those. So if I could defer to the Office of Recovery on that question, I'd appreciate it.
Reasonable to me.
So sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I continue? It says actual FY 2020, the Office of Recovery had 15 FTEs. Was that approved by the legislature?
So there is no approved, really. I mean, we sort of talk about FTEs and then we present them to you and then we treat them as they're approved, but there's no FTE limitations or counts specifically that are put into an appropriations bill. So, and also this becomes very complicated around this issue because there were certain grants of authority made to the Office of the Governor to spend and implement those. And so, you know, I would have to get back to you on exactly. I know that it's likely that in 2020, the legislature didn't receive a request for the Office of Recovery with 15 FTE positions in it. But there may have been other grants of authority to spend money to implement the CARES Act funds, okay, which required staff.
Okay.
So it's just whether or not, you know, two out of the same side.
Mr. Chairman, I think I have the same concern you may have, is that I think this Office of Recovery continues to look like may become a permanent part of the governor's kingdom. So I'm just a little concerned that I don't see an end to this at all. And if anything, it's an increase in maybe a capability that's not really required in the future. So just want to keep an eye on that, I think.
I think that's an excellent argument for legislative oversight. Any further questions? Seeing none. All right,
FY23?
let's do it.
All right. So more adjustments for 23. And so the agency requests 56.2 million, including 8.2 million SGF for 23. It's a decrease of 6 million or 12.1% below the 22 revised estimate. So if you look at ARPA funds, so the American ARPA was enacted on March 11th. It provides 1.9 trillion in federal spending to assist in response to COVID. The agency estimates 19.6 million in ARPA expenditures for 23. This is an increase of 16.1 above the revised estimate. And the agency intends to use the ARPA funds to assist the Office of Recovery, with 8.4 million for consulting services and 1.6 million provided through ARPA as discretionary funds. For CRF, you have a decrease of 7 million, and that's simply because that the authority to expend those CRF dollars is gone, as well as the CRF dollars themselves. And you have a decrease of $477,000 in coronavirus emergency supplemental funds. That's just a non-reoccurring expenditure. So you saw it in the previous year, you don't see it this year. You have a decrease of 1.4 million in Voca Grant expenditures for 23. You have a decrease of $259,412 in FIPSA, or Family Violence Prevention and Services Act dollars. And you have a decrease of $212,489 for the Project Safe Neighborhoods grant program for fiscal year 23, which is it has to do with a comprehensive approach to public safety targeting law enforcement efforts and community engagement. And all other adjustments total $322,776. And the agency decreased the request for SGF primarily for other assistance and domestic violence prevention and child advocacy center grants. But the reason for the decrease is the lack of reappropriated funding. So the reappropriations tend to pop up the FY22 request, and then you see a return back to the standard approved amount in FY23. Their agency requests 68.6 or 68.8 FTE positions, and the governor concurs with her request.
Questions regarding 23? You jumped in and answered my only question prior to even getting started. So that was fantastic. Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question. In fiscal year 2023, is there in the governor's budget funding for the transition money?
I do not know. I will look that up.
I'm just curious what it was in 2018.
Lot.
you. And if it was in 2017 too, between Collier and Brownback, if that was also in there.
So you want the amount budgeted for the two previous transitions and to see whether or not it's included in the 23 budget. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll get on top of that.
Nope. Dylan also had a question regarding Voca. Looks like the 1.4 million decrease is that the obviously that's federal money and we don't have control over that, but is that a symptom of it being not carried over from one year to the next? No.
I would normally just say that's because they haven't applied for the new grants, so that you haven't put it in there. But my understanding, and I think some of your conferees will be much more expert on this than I am, that there's some ongoing issues with that program on a federal level that I think they'll address.
Questions for Dylan? Seeing none.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, now I have, oh, there he is. He was hiding. He was hiding behind Dylan, I see. All right, now from the governor's office, we have Will Lawrence. Welcome to committee, Will.
Mr. Chairman, Will Lawrence, Governor's Chief of Staff. No prepared testimony other than I'll just touch on a few things and heard some questions I can certainly address. For the governor's office budget, the intent was to submit, same as last year, for our purposes. Now, the recovery office is part of that, and that makes things change back and forth. But those FTEs would be associated with the recovery office. We did not. I understand there is a discrepancy here on the 60.6 and 68.8. We had this conversation last year too, where we had some differences in FTEs, though we were asking for an increase when we weren't, and we are not again. Our intent is to keep the governor's office and the SGF same as it has been, or as it's reflected here. As to the budget of the recovery office, to answer Representative French's question, that has gone through State Finance Council for approval. That is how we've flown that through. And even now it goes through the Spark Executive Committee, and then it goes to State Finance Council for approval. So it's kind of a weird process where that happens, but that's a little bit different here from this budget. I will also note that on the transition budget, that is not in the governor's office budget. It is in division of budget, is where they house it every 4 years. So that's where it should be. I believe it should be roughly identical to what it was 4 years ago. I know there is going to be a request from the Friends of Cedar Crest for an additional $15,000. That is a one-time additional for Cedar Crest for a transition. But we didn't actually get that put in the DOB budget, but I think that request is coming as well. And with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to stand for any questions. I have people with me, Secretary Burns-Wallace and Julian Masco with the grants office as well.
Good. All right, questions for Will? Yes, Representative French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I just wondered, I noticed that the Office of the Governor and Lieutenant Governor actually decreased almost by 3 FTEs. Can you kind of expand on the reduction in her staff?
I don't know that there's been a reduction per se. I think there's certainly been some transitions at different times, so it's probably the snapshot in time. But there was no intent to increase or decrease the FTEs. But when staff do leave a position that has been approved and we use in the governor's office, we then replace that position. So I don't know on timing, but there wasn't an intent really to decrease or increase FTEs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Arnberger.
Thank you. My question is it say Julie?
Julene.
And she's on WebEx? Oh, back here. Great. My question is for grants. Do any grants come from the Key Fund?
No, not through our office.
Not through your office. Okay. And you're just with the governor's office for the grant side. You're not grant also with Attorney General.
No, it's the governor's side.
And could you educate us on why there are two different, why some grants are through the Attorney General's office and some are through the Office of the Governor?
I will try. The grants that the Attorney General has are funds from state funding sources through legislation that passed many years ago. Federal grants started under Attorney General Carlos Stovall and Governor Graves at that time when the Violence Against Women Act passed in Congress and some funding came down to the state. General Stovall requested the funding and to administer that fund. And then some Voca funds also became available, and Governor Graves moved that under the Attorney General's office. Then when Governor Sebelius was elected, she wanted the federal grant funds under her direction, so she moved the federal funds, not the state funds, because those were earmarked specifically by statute to the Attorney General, to Governor Sebelius. She also pulled in the criminal or the Sentencing Commission and the Bureau of Justice Assistant Grants, the Burn JAG grant, the Forensic Sciences grant, some of those grants that are listed there. So those all moved back in 2004 under the governor's direction, but mostly all federal grants, other than the 2 state grants that we have now that you'll be hearing testimony about for domestic violence, sexual assault, and child advocacy centers.
Other questions? Seeing none. All right, next up. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence, for being here. Next up, we have ks.gov. All right, from the Children's Advocacy Centers of Kansas. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Sutton and members of the committee. My name is Casey Dalkey. I am the new Executive Director for Children's Advocacy Centers of Kansas. So the chapter is a state organization that serves 16 accredited child advocacy centers across the state of Kansas. We also have one new center that just opened in Lawrence. They're working on going through their accreditation. Hopefully we'll complete that soon. In fiscal year 2021, the centers across the state served 4,479 victims of child abuse of all ages, income levels, ethnic backgrounds, community demographics, and were provided essential services by the Kansas CACs. Following an outcry of abuse, there is only one model in Kansas that brings all these key services and professionals to the table together in a coordinated, efficient, and cost-effective approach to combating child abuse. This model is child advocacy centers. These are centers of excellence in the way that our communities respond to children who have been sexually, physically abused, trafficked, exploited, and severely neglected. Our centers are designed to create the opportunity for healing for children and non-offending caregivers through advocacy, therapeutic approaches, and help facilitate the pathway to justice in a coordinated effort with the investigators involved in the cases. On behalf of Children's Advocacy Centers of Kansas and the CACs in the state, I wish to express our gratitude for the ongoing state funding and support through CAC funding administered to our programs. This funding comes through the Kansas Governor's Grants Program. The state funding has been available to us since it was initiated in 2007 and provides a critical core support that is leveraged to secure other local and federal funding resources. From 2007 to present day, we have more than doubled the number of child abuse victims served each year. Victim programs. In addition, national research has shown that approximately $1,000 per case is saved when facilitated through a child advocacy center. So with the 4,478 children that we've served at $1,000 a piece, that's upwards of savings of $4.4 million. We know that there continue to be many demands on the state budget and continue to be that way due to the impacts of COVID-19. And we do wish to, again, thank you for our funding support needs and supporting us through that. I would like to, however, also bring attention to the thought processes of increased funding moving forward or for future CACs. When I spoke earlier about the Child Advocacy Center that opened in Lawrence, because of the static nature of the current budget, they're unable to access any of the funds currently through the CAC state grant. So, we know that there are 31% of Kansas that is not served by a CAC or underserved, does not have one within a reasonable location. We would like to change that and to have that growth and to serve all of the, children of Kansas that need us the most. We're going to need access to some of those funds. So we're currently maintaining around $802,000 to $804,000 budget currently for fiscal year 23. Our budget is set at $804,984. So with that, again, thank you so much for supporting our agencies. And with that, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you for being here.
Yes.
Also here, actually, first off, are there any questions for Ms. Dalkey? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dalkey, so you're a part of the governor's budget, and so all your numbers are just incorporated into her numbers. Is that they're not a special line item, are they? Or am I missing something?
When you're referencing numbers, do you mean the dollar amount or which numbers are you referencing?
Yeah.
I think what the representative is getting at is that we have the big picture of the governor's office, and we're trying to figure out where your funding comes in on these line items or through the grant office. What grants does it come from? Is that Voca? Is it what have you? Whatever fund that comes in, where does yours play into that?
Sure. So we receive the CAC state funding makes up about 16% of our budget, but we also receive funding from Voca and then AGCAC, but the AGCAC is not steady. It's more of a funding that comes in through fines and forfeitures and fees and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, perfect. Other questions for Ms. Dalkey? Actually, Dear, if you could help us out with whatever you provided with Paul there.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I was just directing Representative Wagner's attention to page 4. It sort of lines out the domestic violence prevention grants and the child advocacy center grants. Obviously, those are grants funds, so they're not a state agency, but they do receive some state funds, and those state funds are used to draw down federal funds, I believe, by the provider rather than the state in this case.
Excellent. All right. That helps tremendously. Thank you. Okay. Taking it easy on you because you're new.
Hey, that's all right. I'll take that.
We'll get you next time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. All right. Next, we have Joyce Grover from the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence.
Hello. Thank you.
Oh, she's
I'm
virtual.
on WebEx. Yes. And since I've been here for a long time, I don't know what you're going to do to me. So a little bit nervous about that. So I'm Joyce Grover. I'm the executive director of the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. And I kind of divide my testimony into two pieces. One is the services numbers. We have served more victims of domestic violence and sexual assault than ever before. This is more than we were serving before the pandemic started. But we're also serving them in an atmosphere that is very difficult because many of our shelters and services are provided in communal spaces. Most of the shelters, not all of them, but most of the shelters in Kansas are residential houses. So people have shared bathrooms, shared kitchens, shared living space. And that has created really some pretty difficult situations in terms of just trying to keep everybody safe and healthy during this pandemic. But I want to really focus my remarks today on the impending, what we feel like is an impending issue with the Voca grant. Several years ago, Voca was it's a formula grant. It is funding that comes through the Crime Victims Trust Fund. It goes to the Victims of Crime Act, and it is awarded out to the states in a formula. It's appropriated, and then there's a formula grant that comes out to the state. Typically, that amount that came to Kansas was around the $4 million range. There is usually a match for Voca, so often that's what the state funds were used for, to match those federal funds. And then in 2016, the Congress decided that they were going to release more of these funds from the Crime Victims Trust Fund. And Kansas and many other states and territories began to receive quite a bit more funding, formula funding for direct service programming. These funds are specifically for direct service programming. So in 2016, Kansas received around $20 million. In 2017, there was a little less. 16 million. In 2018, Kansas received just under 30 million. So each of these awards, the state has 4 years to spend, and the Kansas Governor's Grants Program has been awarding those out over time. Several years ago, it became clear that this trust fund was going to be depleted or nearly depleted unless something was done with the kinds of deposits that we're putting and supporting the trust fund. And so it took Congress a couple of years to get that fixed, and they did fix it last year. There are additional deposits now being made into that trust fund, which will fund Voca, but that depletion has not been made up yet. So we're very concerned that there will be this period where the funds will be less and the need is still great. And I just want to bring that to the attention of the committee and the legislature, because this has been a partnership over years between the legislature, local communities, and federal funders. So we are very concerned about it. We feel like this is the year we really need to let people know that 22 million that goes out to grantees not only supports domestic violence and sexual assault programs and child advocacy centers, but it supports organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Kansas Legal Services, the Disability Rights Center, all who are providing direct services to crime victims in Kansas. So perhaps we are asking too soon or bringing this issue too soon, but we feel like that $22 million is providing very critical services across Kansas to all sorts of crime victims, and we want there to be some consideration of how we keep that from crashing. So that I come to you, I use that $22 million number as knowing that that's what the current grants are, and that any one of those organizations that are receiving those funds need them for their everyday and direct service work. And they need them especially now as the numbers of services have been so far up. So I bring this to you as a concern. I'm not exactly sure when or how we should fix it, or if it needs to be fixed this year or next year. But I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't bring that to your attention. That's a major concern, I think, for all crime victim services programs, including county and district attorneys' offices and law enforcement agencies. I am happy to answer any questions and provide you more information if I don't have it.
Well, Ms. Grover, I'm certainly glad that you brought it to our attention. The very possible future issue that we could be facing. One thing that particularly budget legislators hate most of all are surprises. So if we can plan for something like this, I think that's not a bad idea, and I think that might be something that we want to communicate to the Full Appropriations Committee as well.
Great.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Grover? Representative Wagner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Grover, for bringing this to our attention. I just to follow the math on this, that you award over $22 million annually, if that's correct. And so the federal funding is disappeared, or it's only partial, or what's kind of the gap that you're trying to make up in this request?
Well, we don't award those grants, so I would defer to the Kansas Governor's Grants Program about how that works. But my understanding is that each annual award, they have 4 years to spend it, so they might spend 10 million of the 20 million in year one and 10 million in the second year, using the next award to keep those grants stable, and that kind of continues on. As in fiscal year 21, federal fiscal year 21, the state received $9 million, just over $9 million, compared to 2018 when it received $29 million. So the Kansas Governor's Grants Program is managing that, I think, in trying to keep there from being a gap. But since the fix for this Voca fund was only passed last year, it is going to take time to replenish that trust fund, and to keep, to sort of bring those funds back up to where they have been over the most recent years. And the fiscal year 22 budget, federal fiscal year 22 budget, you may know, has not been passed by Congress, and it is on continuing resolution until February 18th. So the fiscal year 22 numbers are in that budget, and we don't know what those will be.
I see. But so, I mean, just the basic math you had of going from the 29 million in fiscal year 2018 from the federal government, going down to 9 million in fiscal year 21. So, again, you're basically in a $20 million range. Is that kind of what you're trying to make up?
Right.
And that's the annual difference.
Yeah, the annual grants that go out are just over 22 million.
All right.
Committee, further questions? I think it's because you're last.
Everybody's tired and they need to go home.
That's exactly it. That's what the set getting here. Yes, and let's hear. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Seeing no other comments or questions, thank you for sort of being here, Ruth.
Thank you very much for allowing me to testify virtually. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Now, committee, I believe Analyst Deere has some answers to questions that came up earlier in our discussions.
Mr. Chairman, on the first one, I'll owe all the credit to Stephen Wu, because he's been letting me know, but it's $150,000 of transition money. It's in the Department of Administration budget inside the Division of Budget, and it is included as part of the governor's budget submission. And I think that's due to statute as well. It has to be included.
In the Department of Administration budget?
In the Department of Administration inside the Division of Budget program.
Okay. You threw me when you said the governor's budget.
I understand. It's confusing. And on the FTE question, so Representative Wagner is correct. It was at 60.6 FTE positions. At that time, the Office of Recovery was estimated to have 16.1 FTEs, not 25 FTEs. Then this committee deleted an additional 2 FTE positions that were determined to be interns and not regular staff. And that got you to an approved number of FTEs at 43.8. Okay, and then reinstated the Office of the Recovery as the ARPA funds were passed. Because formerly the CRF would have expired and the Office of Recovery, wouldn't have had any operating funds. And that added the 25 FTE positions to get you to the 68.8 FTE positions. So it's a sort of a comparison between the approved versus the actuals, and the actuals included the Office of the Recovery at 16.1 instead of 25, which explains the discrepancy.
We will, at this point, not be meeting tomorrow. I know you're deeply upset about that. However, on Monday, we will be hearing the Board of Barbering budget, the Board of Cosmetology budget, and these are separate. And the Kansas Dental and the Kansas Dental Board will also make our recommendations for the Secretary of State and the Governor's office on Monday. And so until that time, did you have something to add? Yes. No problem. We'll do the dental board first so that the barbers that you've lined up can listen to the dental board budget. All right. Until that time, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.